Hey guys, thanks for watching. I've had this Fisher Paykel washer for quite a long time, about 15 years now, and really haven't had any problems with it. All of a sudden, out of the blue, it started making this weird low-pitched grind, not really a grinding noise, but very loud noise whenever the spin would happen. So I thought I'd take a look. I thought maybe it was the motor at first. Then I was thinking maybe something else, maybe the main bearings. Did a little research, and it turns out that the main bearings eventually do fail. No big surprise there. So I decided to dig into this. This is the most complex project I've done with Fisher Paykel, and I've never worked on a washer before, but it's something that you guys can do as well. So here's what it sounds like when those bearings start going bad. It's pretty loud, and it's something that you're not going to miss. So when I started on it, I gathered the parts I needed. I've got a lot of automotive tools, so I had quite a bit of tools that I felt like I could do the project with. There's a couple of parts you'll need. The main bearings. You only need one of these 425006P part numbers, as that part number includes both bearings. And then you'll also need the washer tub gasket. That's also really important. So those are the two main parts that I needed for my project. I didn't really have any other leaking or anything else going on. It was just the noise I wanted to fix. So moving right along. All right, so don't forget the basics. You gotta unplug the machine, shut the power, or excuse me, shut the water off at the water supply, and then you'll have to take that drain hose out as well. I stuffed them down into the tub of the machine as I pulled it out of the laundry room, since there's just not enough room in that laundry room to really work on it. Okay, so to get into this machine, it's super easy. There's two screws under little bumper pads on the front panel. There's two screws in the back that you can see right there highlighted in the red. Take those off and you'll be able to lift the panel up. If you take a look at the left hand side here, you can see that it just lifts up. There's two little tabs that I've got highlighted in with the blue arrows that you're going to want to remove once you're ready to take that off. You won't be able to take it off initially, because if you look at the arrow there, there's wiring and a tube that connects to the control circuitry of the machine. So because I'm a novice at working on washing machines, and I've never worked on one of these before, I decided to remove the electronics completely away from the machine while I was working on it, in case I slipped or water got into the electronics or something bad like that. So to take that board apart, it looks a little daunting maybe at first if you're not familiar with these, but don't be too concerned about it. This is a good time to stop and mark all your wires if you're worried about it. I didn't do that. I didn't need to. You can't plug the wrong connector into the wrong socket, because they're all keyed, and there's really no way to do that unless you try really, really hard. So you have to just go around the entire perimeter of the board, removing all those connectors. There is a single sensor that plugs into the main inlet for the water supply for the machine. You'll need to remove that and take the wiring and off and move it aside. There's a ground strap wire that you'll need to disconnect. Underneath the circuit board, there's a sensor switch that you'll have to disconnect and take that wire cable off and put it aside as well. Once you've got all that out of there and disconnected, make sure that you remove the grounding strap from the back of the machine that's clipped on there. And then you can see all the way to the right that there's a little spoon-shaped thing that holds the cables and the tube in place for the washer itself. All right, so once you've got the top off, it's pretty simple to do. You just kind of reroute the cables and the tube through that top and pull it off. Once you've got that done, then you can pull the agitator out. That's what I've got highlighted in the big red arrow there. To take that out, just take the top cap off. And on my model, it had this wing nut looking thing that held the agitator in. You can see just how dirty and icky it is in this machine. So if you don't like getting your hands dirty and working with a little bit heavier machinery, then this might not be the job for you, but I didn't find it too terribly difficult. So anyways, that wing nut pulls that, or lets you pull that agitator out. It comes right out, and what you'll see at the bottom is the drive shaft here that's got splines all the way around. To get below that drive shaft, or to get down to where the bearings are and where the seal is, you're going to have to take these 3 screws out, and take this plate off, this plastic plate. There's a little, I don't even know what you call it, but there's a kind of a gear type of thing in the middle there. And you just need to pull those out, set them aside so that you can deal with those later. You'll be putting those back in. So the next thing to do is to take off this top retaining ring. Just go around the whole perimeter of the ring and use your fingers and just pull up on that gently, as it's just tabbed on around that whole structure there. Once I got that done, I turned the machine on its side. You want to use padding so you don't scratch it up, but just turn it on its side so that the water doesn't fall or come out of the tub assembly. There's some nasty, icky water down in the bottom that you probably don't want spilling everywhere. So I kind of tipped it over at that angle. I was able to get to the main motor underneath and see everything underneath just fine that way. All right, so moving on. The next step I took was to remove the main motor. There's a big wheel basically that's got magnets. That's the main drive section of the motor, if you will. And then you've got the internal stator section of the motor that actually has electricity running to it. This main drive system, shell thing, whatever they call it, is very simple. It's just a plastic shell with magnets embedded in it. So there's not a lot to go wrong with that. I checked it for cracks and that sort of stuff, but there were no cracks in mine. All right, so the stator, to remove that, there's going to be 4 wires, and I'll show you that in a second. But there's also 4 bolts that you'll have to loosen up and take off. They're not hard to undo or anything. They're in there pretty easily. So what's it look like under there with the wires? You've got red, blue, and yellow wires, and if you look closely on the stator, you'll see an R, B, and Y indicating exactly where those need to connect when you reconnect your motor. So no big deal there. The other connection is a key to connection that connects to the sensor, the motor position sensor, and again, you can't screw that up when you're putting it back on because it only goes one way. All right, so no big worries there. I did notice on my stator that it had, I don't know, probably 4 different places that it was cracked. So I took a drill and I drilled out at the end of these cracks to hopefully keep the cracks from spreading worse. At some point it may fail, or it may run for the remainder of the life of the machine just fine. So I decided to do that rather than try to replace it. It hadn't been causing me any trouble, so I just left it alone. Okay, so moving on. Once you've got the motor off, and the reason I took the motor off is because when you take this drum out, there's going to be some jiggling and banging and a little bit of that action going on. So I didn't want to potentially damage the motor, so I took that off first. So anyways, at this point, you can pull that drum, the spin drum, off the machine. I ended up pulling it straight up. It wasn't particularly stuck. I imagine that sometimes that could get pretty stuck, and you might have to use some other method out there to get that free, but I didn't have to. I just lifted up and it stuck a little bit. I wiggled it and eventually it just popped right out. So that was not an issue. This is what it looks like in the tub after that drum is out of there. So you can see the main seal at the bottom there, and there's the drive shaft. Moving along. Okay, to get the main shaft out, I did not find this particularly difficult. I was able to use a vice grip on the splines. Mine happened to just line up with the splines, so I didn't mess them up or anything. And I just took a big wrench and loosened that bottom nut on the drive shaft. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you're driving that main drive shaft out of the bearings that you're going to replace. And you just kind of give it a good tap with a mallet. I used a rubber mallet, and boom, there it is. Easy as that. So at that point, I was able to simply just pull it out with my hands, and like so, and everything looked pretty good on it. There really wasn't any bad scoring or anything once I cleaned it up. It was kind of dirty in spots, so I did clean it up. All right, so moving right along. So to get that next step out, the seal that seals the bearing, I took a C wrench, or a C wrench, and just use that C wrench to pull it out like that. You can see the bearing in there is a little bit rusted. It's a little bit hard to see, it's blurry, but there's also a sleeve inside that you need to make sure that you're getting out and keeping as well, because that's going to be part of the next step. I tapped out the old bearing, the bottom bearing from the top bearing from the bottom with this long crowbar type thing. You could probably use a screwdriver just as easily, but I just kind of went around it in a circle and tapped it out gently, and they came right out. If you had badly seized bearings, you'd probably have to use a different method to tap those out, but mine weren't that bad. Okay, so here you can see the sleeve. It was relatively clean. Water had not penetrated down to that level, but you can see that top bearing had rusted and was going bad. This is what the new bearings look like. Again, you get 2 in a package. So moving right along here. All right. So previously we had gotten the bearings out. Now at this point in the show here, you can see that I've put the bearings in. It was not difficult to press these bearings in. I kind of tapped around the edges of them with a screwdriver to seat them properly. And what you're going to notice on the bottom bearing, keep this in mind, that it does not fully insert into that sleeve housing in the bottom of the machine. So just keep that in mind. Don't try to push it in too hard, or you're going to damage either the bearing itself, or you're going to damage the sleeve that it presses into. So once I was able to get those bearings in, I put the drive shaft back down from the top into the 2 bearings, and then I used this bottom nut to kind of bring those two to their final seating area. So once that was accomplished, I took the seal that you can see here. This came pre-lubricated with the proper lubrication, and it just pressed down into that cavity that you're seeing down here at the bottom. So it was pretty easy to install. You'll have to press it down in. It won't just drop in. You'll actually have to press it in with some force. So don't use anything sharp that might cut the rubber or something like that. All right, so once that's done, I went back up under the machine. It was, of course, on its side. I found that reinstalling the stator was probably the hardest part of this. There are 2 metal ring bracket type things. One goes on the top, one goes on the bottom, and they fit together, and that's where the bolts that hold the stator to the drum That's where they go through, and you can see that right here. So just be aware of that. This brown shield piece comes apart from the stator. It's not held together, so that was kind of fiddly to get back into place. So you might have to work around with that a little bit. Once that stator is back on, it's simply a matter of putting these two ring parts back on the drive shaft from the top. Make sure they're seated properly. I ended up cleaning up the tub and all the parts that were so nasty and icky, just to make things fit together better, and sure enough, they did. So definitely go through that process if you've got the chance. So let's go back. Let's see. So after that's accomplished, reinstall your stator with the wing nut if that's what it's got. Reinstall the electronics in the top, just kind of reverse what you did when you took it apart. So when you're taking it apart, definitely take a lot of pictures. If you're unfamiliar or a little nervous about doing it, just take a lot of pictures while you're doing it, and make sure you figure out how to put that together properly. It's really not hard. Just take your time and go through it, and you'll be just fine. Okay, so double check your work before you screw it back together. But I went ahead and put the top back on and put the lid back on, all that fun stuff before I took it back into the laundry room. And then I reconnected the hoses, turned the water on, plugged it in, and fired it up. It fired up just fine. So I'm going to give you a before and after kind of picture here of what that sounded like. And so here we go. Here's the before part. Pretty loud. Stop that. And here's an after. So it still makes a lot of noise. I mean, there's no magic here. It's still got the typical whine of the motor that you're going to hear, but it's a lot quieter than when the bearings were going out. So I had a successful repair on this. It took me about 4 hours to do it. And I think that was mostly because I'd never worked on a washer before or anything quite like this. So this was all new to me, and it was fun. Got it done, saved a lot of money, and it seems to be working just fine. Thanks for watching.